El siguiente expositor es el profesor David Blake. David Blake nos va a hablar de cómo hacer que las personas tengan mejores pensiones o que tengan buenas pensiones. Vamos a ver cómo podemos analizar todo esto, cuáles son los principales mensajes que, además, desde la experiencia de un país que ha reformado de una forma bastante ejemplar su sistema de pensiones, podemos tener. David es profesor de la City University de Londres, es el director del Pensions Institute, es un afamado investigador, escritor, y nos va a hablar, como les decía, de cómo podemos conseguir mejores pensiones para la gente. So David, when you like, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Is the mic on? Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Diego and Pablo. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here. This session is about more and better pensions, and I think the target should be a good pension, achieving a good pension. And so my talk today is going to be on how to get people good pensions. I'm going to start with a quote from Huey P. Long, the governor of Louisiana. And he said, "One of these days, the people of Louisiana are going to get good government, and they aren't going to like it." And they didn't like it because they shot him. I've come here today to tell you, one of these days, the people are going to get good pensions, and they aren't going to like it, because good pensions are very expensive to provide. So how do we get good pensions without ending up like Huey P. Long? I'm going to begin by saying, what is a good pension? We've heard from Pablo and various other people what a good pension is, but let's just summarize it. It provides lifelong income security in retirement. It requires a lifetime annuity or other longevity risk hedge. It provides an adequate income in retirement that has two elements: poverty protection, to prevent poverty in old age. That's the very first reason for having a pension. And in many countries, pensions account for 80% of older households' income. So the pension is incredibly important. And then, as also Pablo said, is we want income maintenance. We want to maintain living standards in retirement similar to what we had in work. But let's look at the problems of generating a good pension. People either have to save a lot in their pension plan whilst in work, or save less but work much longer. And I'm going to give you some numbers here from a study that I did with Kevin Dowd called Good Practice Principles, and I've sent Diego the paper on that, so it's free. It should be freely available to you if you want it. But here's two examples. Take a male aged 25 who joins a pension plan and retires at 65, and the contributions are invested at 3.5% real interest rate. That's actually very good. Probably in the future we might not get that. But let's look at what happens if you can get 3.5% real return. The replacement ratio is 43% with a 9% contribution, and 43% replacement ratio is not very high. But it rises to 73% if you have a 14% contribution rate. So that tells you the kind of contribution rate you need to contribute. Most countries don't have anywhere close to a 14% contribution rate. The second example is the same male, age 25, joins a pension plan. The contributions are 9%, and again invested at 3.5% real. The replacement ratio is 43% again if this individual retires at 65, but 82% if that individual retires at 70. So 5 extra years of work almost doubles the pension. And that is because you have 5 extra years of contributions, and the pension will be paid for 5 fewer years. So you have 10 extra years of benefit from working longer. So the cheapest way to provide pensions is to get people to work much longer. But let's have a look at the barriers. And let's first look at pre-retirement behavioural barriers. The first one is starting to save. You're all going to be familiar with this from the presentations you've had at this conference. Procrastination and inertia are enemies to savings. Employees fail to join pension plans where they are required to opt in. Retirement savings means reducing consumption now, and this requires self-control, and that's not always easy. Many people find it as difficult to save as other people find it difficult to lose weight or give up smoking. There's an insufficient sense of catastrophe to frighten people into preparing them for retirement and overcoming this self-control problem. And I'm going to ask the question, does the climate risk crisis provide a clue to help us here? And I'll come back to that later. How much to save? How much should we save? It's difficult for ordinary people to know how much to save. Members may be anchored by irrelevant information. The default contribution rate might be 8%, as it is in the UK. Well, presumably, if that's the default contribution rate, it must be the right rate. Well, the answer is no. It's nowhere near high enough to get a decent pension in retirement. What to invest in? Most defined contribution members don't want to choose the fund. In all countries, US, UK, where you have this auto-enrollment, 90% of people choose the default fund. There are many behavioural biases relevant to investment. Regret, you could regret making an investment decision. There's loss aversion. You do not want to make losses on your contributions. There's what's called choice overload and anxiety. Too many investment funds means people don't make decisions at all. People have weak investment preferences, and this is a problem of complexity. Individuals can be easily led. If you ask people, what do you prefer, bonds or shares? Most people don't know the difference between bonds and shares. And then there's the framing. If you tell someone you're aware that equities are risky, people say, I don't want to invest in equities. I want a safe investment. This is my retirement. I want to invest in government bonds. Well, that will give you a very poor return over 40 years. But if you tell people, are you aware that equities tend to generate higher returns in the long run, despite short-term volatility, then you might be able to persuade people to invest in growth assets over a 40-year investment horizon. Then there are personal valuation biases. Personal valuation of pension contributions are subject to two important psychological bias. The first is called exponential growth bias, due to linear projection. People fail to understand the benefits of compounding. Many people underestimate the investment value of growth because they neglect compounding. There's a strong tendency for the brain to linearize functions when extrapolating or forecasting. Then there is present bias. This is the tendency to value the present over the future. And this leads to what's known as hyperbolic discounting. This is where near future values are discounted much more steeply than far future values. And this results in what economists call time inconsistency, whereby even when long-term value is attractive, short-term considerations discourage savings. The combined effect of these two biases is the tendency to overconsume today and so face the possibility of running out of retirement assets before you die. And here is an example of this. So let's suppose you have a 40-year investment horizon and the return is 6% per annum. People linearize that return, and they will estimate that after 40 years, my $1 of investment is worth $3.40. But it will actually be worth $10.29. But then when they do the hyperbolic discounting back to the present, that $3.40 is only worth 95 cents. So people say, well, if I invest $1 today, over 40 years and then discount back that value today, it's only worth 95 cents. I'm not going to invest. I don't see the value of saving for my retirement. So that's the effect of these two biases together. Then there are the at-retirement behavioral biases. Pablo said when we talk about pensions, we only talk about the accumulation phase. We hardly ever talk about the decumulation phase, but that's where the pension, that's where you have the pension. People have a very poor understanding of longevity risk, which is the variability around the life expectancy. So here is a 65-year-old male in the UK. The life expectancy of a 65-year-old male is about 88 years. 88 years. The most likely age of death is 91. But 25% of individuals will die before 83. 25% will live beyond 95. People don't understand that. Who understands that? You can't get ordinary individuals to understand the variability. This distribution makes equities look like a relatively low-risk asset compared with life expectancy, the actual lifetime distribution. When you get to 85, the most likely age of death is in fact 85. Life expectancy has risen to 92, but 26% will reach 95 and 7% will reach 100. This is poorly understood by, even financial advisors do not understand these diagrams. So we have the annuity puzzle. There's an aversion to annuities. People do not voluntarily buy annuities. Annuities are the only way of giving you lifelong income protection. What are the reasons? Losing control. You have to give up a large lump sum for what's an apparently small annuity. Longevity risk, as I've said, poor understanding of this. Paying for advice. People do not voluntarily pay for advice, so they do not value annuities at all. And annuities are the only way of providing lifelong income security. So how do we overcome these pre-retirement barriers? How do we overcome exponential growth bias? So here are some ways, which again have been mentioned in other presentations. Improve financial education, especially in schools. Financial education is very poor in schools everywhere around the world. Generic financial guidance. In the UK, has introduced a free national guidance service called the Money and Pension Service. Provision of online retirement income projections and pension calculators. Again, in the UK, there's something called Money Helper, which is a subsidiary of MAPS. Independent financial advice, if you can afford it. Very few people pay for it. And then face-to-face explanations of compounding along with financial advice. And that's had a large effect on savings in rural China. Actually sitting down and explaining to people the benefits of compounding can have a large effect on savings in rural China, where there's clearly no sophistication at all. So starting to save. And the classic example is the Save More Smart Plans of Benazzi and Taylor, which have been discussed earlier. The member agrees to start or increase savings on a regular basis, not now, but on a date of the next pay rise. Smart plans deal with a number of behavioral traits. They overcome present bias. They accept that individuals have self-control problems. People benefit from pre-commitment devices, auto-enrollment with payroll deduction, and withdrawal restrictions. And they utilize inertia. Inertia is one of the most important behavioral barriers that you can exploit the other way around to get people to do what you want. Since once signed up, workers typically do not cancel the payroll deduction facility. And auto-enrollment is now a key part of pension planning in the US and the UK, as well as other countries. How much to save? The importance of the default contribution rate is essential. It should be at least 12%. The combined employee-employer contribution rate should be at least 12%. Contribution rates in the UK are too low to generate a good pension. They're 8%, 5% employee, 3% employer. The pensions industry is asking for auto-escalation, up to 12%, but the government in the UK is reluctant to do this. And we have a similar issue in Australia. Australia did adopt auto-escalation, and contributions rose from 3% to 9.5%, and the aim is to reach 12%. But the government is again reluctant to increase above 9.5%. So we need to nudge individuals into increasing their contributions. We need to have positive messaging to address the three common weaknesses in preventing increased contributions: affordability, a sense of being overwhelmed, and low confidence. And in the UK, we're trying three messages to overcome these barriers. The first one says, you're already on your way to having a retirement income. You want to build confidence by emphasizing what individuals have, including the benefit of the state pension, the first pillar pension, and any existing pension funds. The next statement is, start from today and plan forwards, helping people work from what they know to understand the gap that they need to close. And then there are steps you can take, breaking it down into manageable and meaningful actions and showing the difference each step could make to retirement. Then what to invest in? How do we deal with choice overload? We need a very well-designed, low-cost default fund, which is diversified across a lot of investments. And you need only a very small number of additional investment funds to cover individuals who have different degrees of risk tolerance. You don't need 100, 500 investment funds to choose from. How to deal with inertia? Use lifestyle or target date investment strategies where you automatically de-risk nearer to the retirement age. How do you overcome at-retirement barriers? Now, this is where we come up with the idea of what we call speedometer retirement expenditure plans. And speedometer stands for spending optimally throughout retirement. And it has 5 stages. First, make a plan. The first thing you have to do is make a plan using a financial advisor or one of the generic financial advice units that we have in the UK, for example. The second thing is you need to secure essential inflation-protected core income. Essential inflation-protected core income to provide a minimal standard of living in retirement. Third, you need to have insurance and a rainy day fund to cover contingencies, such as the breakdown of your car or the breakdown of the boiler in your house. So a rainy day fund if you can't afford insurance for that. Fourth, secure adequate income. And that's the minimum lifestyle to which the pensioner aspires in retirement. Adequate. Fifth, achieve a desired standard of living and make bequests. And this is a universal plan for all retirees, which manages all assets, not only the pension plan, but housing assets as well, and all sources of income holistically to secure a retirement income. Now, how does the speedometer plan deal with behavioral traits? The plan, not the member, deals with the complexity of decumulation through using defaults and commitment devices. It would be good if you could default somebody into this plan. The use of what are called money-back annuities to deal with loss aversion. Money-back annuities pay the residual amount to the estate if you die early on. Positive norming via effective communication. And then the slogan, spend more today safely, save more tomorrow, allows you, when you've built up a decent fund, to spend more today safely, to reinforce the idea that buying an annuity is a smart thing to do. How networks can help. We're now beginning to recognize that nudging is more effective if it's done in networks. Couples of examples are employment-based networks. They're most effective for encouraging pension savings and helping to pay off debt via payroll deduction, with payments used to create positive savings once the debt is paid off. There are social networks, family, friends, and neighbors. And then there's the elephant in the room. And here are 2 graphs which you commonly see, but you don't often see them together. And one of them is the increase in global temperature above the Industrial Revolution level here, pre-Industrial Revolution. And we can see it's been rising since the Industrial Revolution 1850, and it's now here about just over 1. And the COP26, the global target, is to limit that to 1.5 degrees rise by 2050. But you can see over here population growth. And you can see the population was very, very tiny. And then in 1800, it rose to be 1 billion. The global population rose to be 1 billion. And when I was born, the global population was 3 billion. It's now 7 billion. And it's projected to rise. The United Nations is projected to rise, the population will peak at 10.4 billion in 2086. So the issue is, can we keep the rise in global population to 1.5% when you've got this huge expected increase in the global population? And so we have this individual. You know who this individual is. She's the single most influential person on this planet in my lifetime, and that means in your lifetimes too. So this 16-year-old schoolgirl has persuaded young people that climate risk is an existential threat to them. There is no one telling this same group of young people that longevity risk is also an existential threat to them. And not saving for retirement is also going to be have a much bigger effect on individuals who don't save for retirement than climate change will. So to conclude, how to get people good pensions? Assume nothing or very little about individuals. Design products and marketing strategies with the abilities of less sophisticated, less experienced population in mind. That means choice guiding choice editing. Nudging will help if the product design is good, but you need legislative backing. Nudging by itself in countries won't work unless the government introduces legislation such as auto-enrollment and auto-escalation. Networks can help support and reinforce good individual behavior, but we must be realistic about the costs. You either have to contribute a lot when you're young or later retirement, and those are the only two choices. Those are the unavoidable choices. You save a lot when you're young, or you work much longer into your 70s, into even mid-70s. People are now much healthier than they were. They don't go down coal mines anymore. They're much fitter, and they could work much longer than the current standard retirement age of 67 in the UK. Look at the French. The French are rioting in the street because they have to retire at 62. And in France, a French citizen must retire at 60. You're not a French citizen. You're not a French citizen unless you can retire at 60. And the government in France, Macron, wants to raise it to 65. And he won't be able to do it. He just won't be able to do it. Well, good luck to you to try and pay pensions of French people with the demographic problems that we saw earlier on. Good luck to them to try and do that. And we need a longevity risk champion, like Greta. So anyone in this room going to stand up and be the longevity risk champion? We'll find out about that later on. Well, thank you very much.